When Universal announced it was remaking George Romero's Dawn of the Dead, most horror fans assumed the project was dead on arrival. Romero's 1978 film wasn't just a beloved zombie movie, it was a satire about American consumer culture that had been absorbed into film school syllabi and critical canon alike. Touching it felt like a dare. And the people Universal hired to do the touching made the dare look even riskier, a debut feature director who'd spent his career shooting commercials, and a screenwriter whose resume was built almost entirely on cheap, gleefully trashy horror. On paper, it read like a studio cash grab waiting to embarrass itself. That director was Zack Snyder, and the gamble on him was bigger than it looked. He'd built a name shooting slick, award-winning ads and music videos, which meant he knew how to make a single image look expensive, but nobody knew if he could sustain a story for 90 minutes without leaning on tricks. Snyder seemed to know exactly what people thought of him, and he tucked a wink about it into the finished film. Early on, a television in the background is quietly playing one of his own old commercials, a joke aimed at anyone paying close enough attention. The bigger gamble, though, was structural. Instead of restaging Romero's film beat for beat, the team decided to keep only its skeleton, survivors holed up in a mall, and rebuild everything else: pacing, tone, the rules governing the infected, even the music. Snyder and his collaborators talked about it as a reinvention rather than a copy, and that distinction ended up shaping every choice that would later spark arguments. A reverent, faithful remake might have been politely forgotten. What they made instead became something fans are still fighting about. A lot of that friction starts with the script. Writer James Gunn, hired off the strength of low-budget horror credits, turned in something far more character-driven than anyone expected. The nurse, the security guard, the salesman, the young couple, each arrives with a private history that quietly shapes how they behave once the world ends. The jokes land like the gallows humor of exhausted people, not punchlines inserted to relax the audience. It's easy to miss Gunn's fingerprints underneath the gore and the sprinting undead, but it's the reason the characters feel like people instead of body counts. And then there's the choice everyone remembers first: these zombies run. Romero's shamblers were slow by design, patient, inevitable, inseparable from what they represented. Snyder's version sprints, slams through glass, and closes distance in seconds, and that single decision became the loudest signature of the whole remake. Some viewers found it thrilling. Others felt it gutted the thing that made the original mean something. That argument has never really ended, and it says less about zombies than about what people want horror to be doing in the first place. The opening stretch sells that new philosophy immediately. We meet a nurse named Anna living an ordinary day, ordinary job, ordinary marriage, ordinary bed, and then a neighbor's child appears in her doorway, and within minutes her husband is dead and her street is on fire. There's no breathing room built in, the film refuses to pause and explain itself, because explanation isn't the point. By the time Anna's outside, the rules of the world have already changed, and neither she nor the audience gets to catch up. Where she eventually lands is a shopping mall, and getting that location right took real production work. A mostly empty Toronto area mall was redressed with invented store brands, stocked window displays, and sightlines built for chases and standoffs, not just dressed to look real, but built to function as a real space a camera could move through. The mall had to feel genuinely inviting before the film could spend 2 hours slowly revealing how little safety it actually offered. The gore leans heavily practical, prosthetics, makeup, physical rigs, with digital work reserved for shots no practical setup could pull off safely. It's a slower, costlier way to make a horror movie, but it's also why the violence still reads as weighty instead of weightless years later. Then there's the title sequence, one of the more audacious choices in the film, real-feeling news footage of global collapse set to a Johnny Cash recording released near the end of his life, giving the credits a strange, almost biblical gravity. It does double duty, establishing that this outbreak is happening everywhere, not just in one Wisconsin mall, while signaling immediately that the film has no interest in offering comfort. Notably, the movie never explains where the plague came from. No virus name, no government conspiracy, no late film scientist with answers. The characters never get ahead of what's happening to them, and neither does the audience, which keeps the dread feeling immediate instead of academic. Sarah Polley's performance as Anna anchors all of it. Rather than playing a typical screaming horror lead, she plays competence under pressure, someone whose nursing instincts take over instead of her panic. Around her, a side story develops almost entirely through handwriting, a survivor on a nearby rooftop named Andy, cut off and dwindling, communicating with the group only by holding up messages on a whiteboard across an impossible gap. It's a quiet, slow-burn idea, and it's one of the more genuinely affecting threads in the film precisely because nothing about it is flashy. Not every idea made the cut. An early version of the script floated a supply run built around trained dogs, some of which would eventually turn. A sequence dropped once it became clear the production and creature work involved would pull focus from the human story at the center. Elsewhere, the film commits to choices that still divide viewers, including a pregnancy storyline played with unflinching seriousness rather than for shock value, and a needle-drop joke where the same song shows up twice, once as a lounge cover providing dark comedy, once at full volume over the credits as a gut punch. Romero's own cast turns up throughout in disguised cameos, Ken Foree as a TV preacher, Tom Savini as a sheriff, Scott Reiniger as a general, small tributes buried where casual viewers would never clock them. And the ending refuses any clean exit, a hopeful escape by boat gives way, under the credits, to handheld footage suggesting the survivors' island refuge was overrun all along, denying the audience the relief it had just been handed. Romero himself gave the film a famously split verdict, praising its opening as genuinely effective filmmaking while feeling the rest of it had traded his satire for spectacle, admiration and disappointment sitting side by side, which is probably the most honest review the film ever got. Critically, it landed the same way, praised for pace and craft, criticized for hollowing out the original's meaning, with neither camp ever fully winning the argument. Commercially, it worked, and it helped push fast, aggressive zombies from an indie experiment into a mainstream Hollywood default, opening doors that turned Snyder from an unproven commercial director into one of the studio system's go-to names almost overnight. More than 20 years later, the question the film still provokes hasn't gone away: does changing everything except the premise count as honoring the original, or replacing it? People are still arguing about that one in the comments.